The cold winds of Temper's Gate howled through the barren landscape, carrying the scent of molten rock and the faint smell of sulfur. The Forge world wasn't a planet in the traditional sense. It was a volcanic wasteland built for one purpose: to test the might of various species in the galaxy. Its surface was a patchwork of boiling salt flats, fiery mountains, and thick, twisted bramble forests, an unforgiving place where only the strong and resourceful survived. Here, the galaxy's most powerful factions gathered to demonstrate their weaponry, each vying for lucrative military contracts that would allow them to dominate the stars. And yet here stood a human, Lieutenant Alex Carter, who'd been given a seat at the table. To most of the committee, this was a joke. Alex had been dropped onto the surface of Temper's Gate a mere 48 hours ago, and with no ship or hovercraft to ride in, he'd made the journey on foot. His weather-beaten pack, worn from countless battles, was all that he carried. No high-tech tools, no advanced weaponry. Just the old-fashioned gear of a soldier who knew how to make do. He had always been a mechanic, an engineer, and most recently, a mercenary. What he had learned over the years was simple. When all else fails, the human mind, sharp as a blade, can create something from nothing. As Alex arrived at the staging ground for the trial, his boots kicked up the blackened ash of the volcanic plains. The wind bit at his face, and he squinted against the harsh glare of the Forge world's twin suns. Around him, alien figures were already gathered, delegates from across the galaxy, each representing a different species. The Vin, tall and crystalline with jagged exoskeletons, stood off to one side, speaking in low, resonant voices. The Kayak bioluminescent overseers with three jointed arms hovered silently, their nodes pulsing in a rhythmic pattern. And in the distance, the Dalmer, a reptilian species known for their biological warfare expertise, crouched silently, their breathing echoing through the air in mechanical hisses. They all had one thing in common: they had underestimated humanity. And today, Alex would make sure they'd remember why that was a mistake. "Late human," a voice called out, sharp and mocking. It was one of the Vin delegates who watched Alex approach with disdain. He could feel the eyes of the committee on him, their skeptical gazes filled with amusement and condescension. Alex adjusted the straps of his pack and walked forward with quiet confidence, his gait unshaken. "I'm right on time. If you're using the Kithic standard, I'm 4 minutes early," he said, his voice dry as the wind that howled across the Forge world. It was a small thing, but the comment was enough to irritate the Vin further. The Kayak overseer, with her shimmering blue skin and multicolored nodes, tilted her head, watching Alex closely. "Have you reviewed the parameters, Terran?" she asked, her voice measured and professional. "I've read the rules. Build a weapon from nothing. Prove it works. That's simple enough," Alex replied. He could feel the eyes of the other contractors on him. They were used to advanced technology, high-level designs, tools of war that required complex resources. But Alex had something they didn't: the ability to make do with what was around him. The only question was whether he could make the others see that. The lead Kayak nodded slowly, her nodes flickering. "You may begin. You have 48 hours, raw materials only, no imported technology beyond basic survival gear." The words hung in the air as the challenge had been set. No molecular printers, no prefabricated parts, only the hostile environment of Temper's Gate and whatever resources Alex could scavenge. He had no illusions about what the other contractors could do. The Vin were known for their advanced metallurgy, able to forge weapons of unimaginable sharpness and durability. The Kayak specialized in high-tech energy weapons, while the Dalmer were biological engineers, capable of creating living weapons from the planet's flora and fauna. But none of them had the thing Alex had: a deep understanding of human ingenuity. Alex turned and surveyed the barren landscape. Volcanic rock stretched out before him, jagged and black, broken by occasional rivers of flowing magma. To the north, dense bramble forest swayed in the hot wind, while to the south, a massive salt flat glimmered in the distance. The wasteland to the west seemed impossibly empty, a place the other species had long ago abandoned as too barren to be of any use. But Alex didn't believe in the idea of nothing. Nothing to him meant everything could be used. The other contractors had already begun their work. The Vin delegation had moved toward the volcanic plains, selecting mineral deposits to smelt down into weapons. The Kayak had made their way to the salt flats, where crystalline structures could be harvested and molded into weapons. The Dalmer, meanwhile, had vanished into the bramble forests, no doubt beginning to cultivate whatever biological weapons they could create from the hostile environment. But Alex, instead of rushing to the areas already claimed by the other species, began to walk toward the wasteland, the area that had been picked over and discarded. It was the one place where he could work without interference. There was no doubt in his mind that the barren land held more secrets than the others could see. "Are you sure about this, Terran?" one of the Kayak delegates asked, their voice a soft hum that reverberated through the air. "The wasteland has been thoroughly depleted." "I'll be fine," Alex replied with a calm smile. He could feel the skeptical gazes of the others on his back, but he didn't care. They had no idea what he was about to do. With that, Alex began his trek into the wasteland, leaving behind the others as they worked with their advanced high-tech materials. He knelt in the dust, digging through the broken ground with his bare hands. The wind kicked up ash and debris, but Alex barely noticed. His eyes scanned the ground, searching for the right materials. He needed to find stones with a specific composition, ones that could be shaped into tools. He picked up a rock, studied it for a moment, and then tossed it aside. It wasn't right, too soft. He needed something harder. Hours passed as he worked, each stone he found rejected until finally one caught his attention. It was rough and uneven, but it had the sharp edges he was looking for. With his knife, Alex began to strike the stone, sending sharp flakes flying with each precise blow. Slowly, a blade began to emerge from the rock, a simple but deadly stone knife. It was primitive, yes, but sharp, very sharp. The alien contractors continued their work in the distance, too focused on their advanced technologies to notice what Alex was doing. But they would soon. As Alex continued to chip away at the stone, something began to stir in the pit of his stomach, an unsettling feeling that something bigger than a simple trial was about to unfold. He had been given this opportunity to prove humanity's worth, but what he didn't know was that his work on Temper's Gate would not only test his abilities, but also his very survival. And soon, the others would realize that the weapons Alex was making weren't just tools for battle. They were a glimpse into the terrifying versatility of human warfare. Just as Alex finishes the first blade, he hears a rumble in the distance. The ground trembles and he looks up, his heart racing. Something is approaching, something massive, and it's not just the other contractors' weapons that are about to be tested. The ground shakes again, stronger this time, and Alex realizes with dread that his trial is about to take a dangerous turn. The tremors beneath Alex's feet continued, the ground shaking like an angry beast beneath him. The wasteland, previously so silent and desolate, now felt alive with anticipation. The rocks, once steady beneath his boots, now seemed to shift under the pressure of an unseen force. He stood frozen for a moment, staring into the horizon, but the source of the rumbling remained hidden behind the desolate dunes. "What the hell?" Alex muttered to himself, eyes scanning the barren landscape for any sign of movement. The other contractors were too absorbed in their work to notice the change in the air, their backs turned to the wasteland as they toiled with their tools. He was alone out here, alone with the wasteland, the storm, and whatever lay hidden beneath the surface. The tremor subsided for a moment and Alex exhaled, returning his focus to the blade in his hands. The stone was nearly finished, a simple yet deadly weapon. He could feel the sharpness in his fingertips as he ran them over the edges. It was crude, primitive, but it could easily cut through flesh. It was the beginning of his arsenal, but he wasn't done yet. There was still much to do. But then the tremor came again. This time it wasn't just the ground that moved. The very air seemed to shift, vibrating with something unfamiliar. Alex's heart raced as a low, resonant sound filled the air, like the growl of a distant predator. He looked up, eyes narrowing. And then he saw it. A massive ship, unlike any Alex had ever seen, loomed on the horizon. Its sleek, dark hull reflected the dying light of Temper's Gate's two suns, casting an ominous shadow over the wasteland. It moved quickly, cutting through the air with an unnatural grace, its engines humming with a low, mechanical growl. The ship was huge, and it was coming straight toward the trial grounds. The contractors began to notice it too. The Vin, Kayak, and Dalmer delegates looked up from their work, their expressions shifting from curiosity to alarm. They scrambled to collect their materials, looking for shelter, as though the sight of the ship had triggered a deep, instinctive fear in them. Alex stood motionless, eyes locked on the vessel as it descended, its engines roaring with power. He knew instinctively that this wasn't a ship of the committee, this wasn't part of the trial. Whatever this was, it was not good. As the ship landed, the dust from the wasteland was kicked up in a storm of ash and debris. The air grew thick with tension. Alex reached down to grab his pack, securing the stone blade inside. He needed to be ready. No one knew what was coming, but one thing was certain: this was no ordinary interruption. The ship's hatch opened with a hiss, and out stepped the figures. They were humanoid, but their armor was unlike anything Alex had seen before, black, heavy, with glowing red accents. The armor was sleek but menacing, and the soldiers inside it radiated a cold, calculated presence. They moved with precision, their every step coordinated like a well-oiled machine. The leader, a towering figure with a face obscured by a dark helmet, stepped forward. His voice, when he spoke, echoed through the wasteland, amplified by a sophisticated comm system. "This trial ends now," the voice crackled, deep and commanding. "The Iron Dominion has arrived." The name struck like a hammer to Alex's chest. The Iron Dominion. A faction known throughout the galaxy for their ruthless conquests, their iron grip on power, and their belief in absolute order. Their arrival here on this Forge world was no coincidence. They had come to impose their will on the galaxy and to silence anyone who dared defy them. The Vin delegation immediately reacted, their crystalline bodies flashing in alarm. The Kayak moved in a synchronized, defensive formation, their bioluminescent nodes pulsing with tension. Even the Dalmer, usually so quiet, shifted uncomfortably, their mechanical breathing accelerating. Alex, however, stood firm. He wasn't going to let this disruption stop him. He had a trial to finish, a challenge to complete. The Iron Dominion might have come with their weapons and threats, but Alex wasn't the type to back down. The lead Dominion officer addressed the committee with disdain. "This planet is now under our control. You will cease this foolishness and submit your results immediately. There will be no further testing." His voice carried a chilling authority, and Alex could see that the other contractors were already wavering, unsure how to react to this sudden shift in power. "But not Alex. You may have arrived in time to disrupt the trial," Alex called out, his voice steady, though his mind raced with possibilities. "But I didn't come here to submit. I came here to show you why humanity belongs in this fight." The Dominion officer turned slowly to face Alex, a cold smile creeping beneath his helmet. "And what exactly do you think you can do, Terran? You're surrounded by species that have perfected weapons far beyond your primitive tools." Alex didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his voice rising with confidence. "You want to see what humanity can do? Then watch closely." He reached into his pack and pulled out the stone blade, holding it up for the Dominion leader to see. "This is just the beginning." The Iron Dominion officer's amusement faded, replaced by a look of cold calculation. "You're brave, human, but bravery alone won't save you." The tension in the air was palpable. The other contractors, Vin, Kayak, and Dalmer, shifted nervously, unsure of how to react. The Dominion's presence was an overwhelming force, their technology and discipline intimidating. But Alex wasn't afraid. "You'll see," Alex said, his eyes narrowing. "You'll see what happens when you underestimate humanity." And with that, the confrontation began. The Dominion leader's hand rose, and with a signal his soldiers began to move in unison, their weapons drawn and aimed directly at Alex. The other contractors looked on, too afraid to intervene. Alex stood alone in the wasteland, surrounded by enemies with weapons far superior to his own. He had only his primitive weapons, his ingenuity, and his unshakable will to survive. The countdown to the showdown had begun. Would Alex's determination be enough to overcome the overwhelming force of the Iron Dominion? The tension in the air was so thick that Alex could almost taste it. The Iron Dominion soldiers moved in a tight formation, their black armor gleaming under the harsh light of the Forge world's twin suns. Every step they took was deliberate, calculated. Their weapons, sleek, efficient, and deadly, seemed to hum with quiet menace. Their leader, still towering in his obsidian armor, stood back, watching the scene unfold. Alex's hand tightened around the stone blade, the edges sharp enough to slice through flesh with ease. He didn't flinch. He didn't back down. Humanity had always been the underdog, and Alex had come to show the galaxy why that was a mistake. "You've already lost, human," the Dominion officer said coldly, his voice amplified by the helmet's comm system. "Your primitive tools are no match for our weaponry. Stand down and maybe we'll spare you." Alex's lips curled into a thin smile. "You underestimate humanity's ability to adapt," he said, his voice steady and strong. "I'm not afraid of your weapons. You're the ones who should be worried." With that, Alex reached into his pack, pulling out the tools he had crafted: the stone knife, a rough but effective spear, and the primitive bow he'd constructed from the wasteland's natural resources. They weren't advanced, not by the standards of the Dominion, but they were weapons nonetheless, and they were more than enough to prove his point. The Iron Dominion soldiers, seeing Alex's challenge, adjusted their formation, their eyes never leaving him. They were ready. They were always ready for battle, their discipline honed through countless campaigns. Alex raised his stone blade, holding it steady. Let's see how well your superior weapons handle against something a little more primitive. Before the Dominion soldiers could respond, Alex was already moving. His feet barely touched the ground as he darted forward, using the momentum of his body to propel him towards one of the closest soldiers. The first attack was a blur, a swift strike with the stone blade aimed at the soldier's exposed neck. The Dominion soldier barely had time to react, his head jerking to the side as the stone edge cut through his armor with surprising precision. Blood splattered across the cracked earth, staining the wasteland red. The soldiers around him gasped, momentarily stunned by the effectiveness of the attack. They had expected Alex to falter, to fall before their superior technology. Instead, he was moving faster than they could follow, his eyes locked on his next target. A second soldier, trying to raise his weapon, had no time to fire. Alex lunged, driving the stone blade deep into his chest, just below the ribcage. The soldier's body crumpled to the ground in an instant, 2 down just like that. The Dominion leader watched from behind his soldiers, a grim expression behind the visor of his helmet. This wasn't the outcome he had anticipated. He hadn't thought a human, one of the weaker species in the galaxy, could pose a serious threat to his soldiers. But here Alex stood, wielding nothing but crude, Stone Age tools, cutting through the finest of the Dominion's technology like it was nothing. One of the Kaic contractors, who had been observing from the sidelines, took a step forward. "Impressive," she murmured, her bioluminescent nodes flashing in a pattern of surprise. "I didn't think it was possible for such primitive weapons to be so effective." The other contractors, still recovering from their initial shock, began to shift uneasily. The Dalmer, normally quiet and methodical, now regarded the human with something close to respect. The Vin, who had always viewed the human species with disdain, exchanged looks of concern. They, too, had underestimated Alex. But even as Alex's stone blade sliced through another Dominion soldier, his body beginning to tire from the relentless pace, he knew he couldn't maintain this for long. The Dominion were many, and they had far more advanced weapons than he could ever hope to match. He needed a plan. He needed to think quickly. A Dominion soldier raised a weapon that crackled with energy, a pulse rifle, powerful enough to tear through the toughest armor. Alex's heart raced as he ducked behind a rock outcropping just in time, feeling the heat of the blast singe his clothes. He could hear the hum of the pulse rifle as the soldier fired again, the shot missing by mere inches. "Is this the best you've got?" Alex taunted, his voice carrying across the battlefield. He was playing a dangerous game now, pushing the limits of what he could do with his primitive weapons. But if there was one thing humanity had mastered, it was improvisation. Alex had learned that in battle, when the odds were stacked against you, you made your own luck. The Iron Dominion soldiers weren't used to their prey fighting back like this. They were trained to conquer, to break the will of their enemies before they even had a chance to respond. But Alex wasn't giving them that satisfaction. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for humanity's place in the galaxy, and he would fight with every ounce of strength he had. A third soldier advanced, his weapon aimed directly at Alex. But just as he was about to fire, Alex whipped out his spear, throwing it with deadly accuracy. The spear flew through the air, piercing the soldier's chest in a flash. He fell to the ground with a loud crash, his weapon clattering uselessly beside him. For a moment, everything was still. Alex stood in the middle of the battlefield, breathing heavily, his eyes scanning for any more threats. The Dominion soldiers were regrouping, no longer underestimating him. They were angry, but there was something else in their eyes now: respect. They had seen the human's ingenuity and bravery, and they knew they couldn't afford to take him lightly any longer. The Dominion leader stepped forward, his voice cold and calculating. "Enough," he commanded. "Withdraw." Alex narrowed his eyes, his muscles aching from the fight, but his resolve unwavering. "You think this is over?" he said, his voice low and steady. "You think you can just walk in here and claim victory, not while I'm still standing?" The Dominion leader's face remained hidden behind his helmet, but Alex could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The leader hesitated for just a moment, then signaled his soldiers to retreat. The battle was over for now. As the Dominion soldiers began to pull back, Alex's eyes darted to the edge of the wasteland. He had expected the retreat, but what he didn't expect was the massive shadow that now loomed over him. From the sky, a fleet of ships, far larger and more terrifying than anything he had seen before, began to descend. The Dominion had only just begun to unleash their true strength, and this time Alex wasn't sure if even his ingenuity would be enough to survive. The ground trembled once more, this time with a deep, resonating hum that made the air feel as if it were alive. The massive fleet of Iron Dominion ships descended from the darkening sky, their sleek, obsidian hulls reflecting the dying light of Temper's Gate's twin suns. There was no mistaking it now. The Dominion had come to finish what they had started. Alex stood tall, despite the ache in his bones and the exhaustion weighing down his every movement. His breath was ragged, his body drenched in sweat and dust, but his eyes burned with determination. The battle had been fierce, but the Dominion had retreated. And now they were coming back in full force, ready to overwhelm him and any hope of humanity's survival here. The fleet consisted of warships, each the size of a city block, their dark hulls covered in strange, glowing markings that pulsed with ominous energy. The ships seemed to devour the sky as they moved, the air growing thicker with every passing moment. The battle was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. Behind him, Alex heard the faint rustling of his fellow contractors. The Vin, Kayak, and Dalmer were regrouping, but there was no unity between them. The Vin were still shaken by Alex's ability to fight back, and the Kayak, though impressed, still regarded the situation with their usual pragmatic distance. The Dalmer, silent as ever, had moved off to one side, but Alex could see their tense posture. It was clear that no one was ready for what was coming next. The Dominion fleet hovered ominously in the air, casting long, dark shadows across the wasteland below. The lead ship, massive, imposing, and adorned with the symbols of the Iron Dominion, descended toward the ground with a slow, deliberate pace, as if daring anyone to challenge its descent. Alex turned to face the committee of alien contractors, his voice low but strong. "We can't let them just take over. We've already seen what they're capable of. If we stand together, we might just have a chance." The Kayak contractor, usually the most composed, nodded slowly, his bioluminescent nodes flickering with consideration. "You speak of resistance, human, but your weapons, what you've built, they are not enough to fight them off. Their technology is far superior." "We don't need superior technology," Alex replied, his voice steady. "We need to work together, use what we have. We've fought in worse conditions, trust me." The Vin, whose initial disdain had begun to shift toward grudging respect, said nothing. Their crystalline forms shimmered in the fading light, but Alex knew their thoughts were elsewhere. The Dalmer, however, had been silent for too long. One of the Dalmer contractors, the one who specialized in biological warfare, finally spoke in a low, gravelly voice. "We cannot fight them in the traditional way. Their tactics are precise, and they have resources beyond anything we can muster here. But there is a way. It will require all of us, and it will require something none of us have tried before." Alex's gaze sharpened. "What are you talking about?" The Dalmer's narrow, reptilian eyes fixed on Alex, then slowly scanned the others. "The wasteland. We may have abandoned it, but it has its own power. The plants, the animals, everything here is in a constant state of transformation, adapting. If we can harness that, use the resources here, the things you've already scavenged, we may have a chance to create something more than a weapon. We can create a defense." Alex considered the idea. It was bold, but it also carried the risk of failure. The Dominion weren't just an advanced military force. They were a force of nature in their own right, a machine of war that seemed impossible to beat. But if there was one thing Alex knew, it was this. Humans had never been afraid to try something new, to take what seemed like a disadvantage and turn it into a victory. "What do you need?" Alex asked, his voice steady. The Dalmer stepped forward. "First, we need to move quickly. Their ground forces will arrive soon. We can use the creatures in this area, the ones that thrive in the harshest conditions. I have already started cultivating them, but we need your knowledge of survival and the terrain to refine it." The Vin contractor finally spoke, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "And what of the weapons we've already built? Should we not use them in the first wave?" "We need more than weapons," Alex said, his eyes scanning the horizon where the Dominion ships loomed like harbingers of doom. "We need to outsmart them. We need something unexpected." The Kayak spoke next, their nodes pulsing brightly in a pattern that suggested contemplation. "You are right. The Dominion expects us to fight with conventional methods. If we show them something they haven't anticipated, it could change the tide. Alex nodded, then looked at the Dalmer, whose thin, sharp eyes gleamed with quiet purpose. Let's make this happen. The Dalmer's response was swift. We need time to prepare, and I will need your help to navigate the deeper parts of the wasteland. There are creatures, ancient creatures, that can be of use, but they are dangerous. Alex didn't hesitate. I'll do whatever it takes. We don't have the luxury of time. As the committee set to work, Alex led the charge, guiding them through the rocky, treacherous terrain of the wasteland. The air was heavy with heat, and the land seemed to pulse with a strange, rhythmic energy. There was something about this place that felt alive, and Alex couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching them, waiting. The Dalmer led them deeper into the wasteland, where the terrain became even more unforgiving. Jagged rocks jutted from the ground like the bones of some long-dead creature, and the ground itself seemed to crack and shift underfoot. The further they went, the more Alex felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. There was no going back now. They had to succeed. And then, as they reached the heart of the wasteland, they found it. The creatures were unlike anything Alex had ever seen, towering beasts with thick armor-like skin that glowed faintly in the low light. They moved slowly, but their massive size and strength were undeniable. The Dalmer had been cultivating them, and now they were ready. Alex stood still for a moment, taking in the sight. The beasts were terrifying, yes, but there was something else in their movements, something purposeful. Do you see it? The Dalmer asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex nodded. They're not just beasts, they're part of the land, and we're going to make them part of our fight. The Dominion's ground forces had begun to land. Thousands of soldiers, heavily armored and armed with the latest in military technology, began to march toward the trial grounds. The fleet in the sky hovered menacingly above them, ready to unleash a full-scale attack. The time for preparation was over. Alex turned to face the creatures they had gathered, his heart pounding in his chest. They were their last hope. But as the Dominion forces advanced, Alex could only wonder, would this wild gamble be enough to stop the unstoppable? The ground shook again, but this time it wasn't from the Dominion's fleet above. It was the charge of their ground forces. Thousands of soldiers, clad in imposing armor, marched forward with the kind of precision that only a fully mechanized army could achieve. Behind them, heavy tanks rolled across the wasteland's rocky plains, their massive treads grinding against the cracked earth. The Dominion were not here to negotiate. They were here to conquer, and Alex could feel the weight of that inevitability pressing down on him like a vice. He had seen battles before. He had fought on distant worlds in places where survival was the only law, but nothing had ever prepared him for the sheer scale of what was coming now. The Iron Dominion were relentless, their war machine built for one purpose, domination, and now they were coming for everything. But Alex had one advantage they hadn't accounted for: human adaptability. The creatures they had encountered in the wasteland were massive, towering beasts, their thick hides and powerful limbs making them formidable. Alex had no illusions about how dangerous they were. But they weren't just animals. They were part of the land itself, and that connection gave Alex an idea he hoped would work. "Ready the creatures," Alex called out, his voice strong and commanding. His pulse was quickening, but there was no room for fear, not now, not when everything was at stake. The Dalmer had been preparing the beasts for hours, nurturing them with strange, yet effective techniques. Their thick, armor-like hides glistened faintly in the low light, and their massive bodies moved with surprising grace for such colossal creatures. They were a force of nature, and now they would be the key to humanity's survival. The Kayak contractor, who had remained mostly silent throughout the planning, now stepped forward. "This is madness," she murmured. "They'll be slaughtered. The Dominion won't hesitate to annihilate them." "They won't get the chance," Alex replied, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. He could already see the first wave of Dominion soldiers advancing across the plains. "We've got one shot at this. If we wait too long, they'll overwhelm us." The Dalmer nodded, her sharp eyes glinting with determination. "We've conditioned them for this. They are more than beasts now. They understand the need to protect." Alex's eyes turned to the sky, where the Dominion fleet hovered ominously. He knew they were waiting for the signal to launch their assault. The time to act was running out. With a signal, the creatures began to move. They surged forward in a terrifying wave, their massive legs thundering against the earth, sending tremors through the ground. their eyes glowing faintly with the strange bioluminescence cultivated by the Dalmer locked onto the advancing Dominion soldiers. They had been conditioned to charge with a singular purpose, to protect the land, to protect the beings that had nurtured them. Alex's heart raced as he watched the creatures crash into the first line of Dominion forces. The Dominion soldiers, though highly trained and heavily armored, were unprepared for the sheer force of the beasts. Massive claws raked across armored vehicles, sending them flying into the air like toys. The creatures trampled through the soldiers with terrifying efficiency, their heavy, scaled bodies smashing through lines of soldiers with little resistance. But it wasn't enough. The Dominion forces were too numerous, and their technology was too advanced. From the rear, the Dominion began to deploy artillery, their heavy weapons raining down on the creatures with devastating force. Explosions shook the ground as the beasts were blasted apart, their bodies writhing in agony as they tried to fight back. Alex's stomach twisted. The creatures were fighting valiantly, but it was clear that they couldn't hold off the Dominion forever. He had to act and fast. "Move," he shouted to the committee. "We need to get to their weak point, their command center. If we can take out their leadership, we can break their coordination." The Kayak hesitated. "The command center is heavily protected. The Dominion will stop at nothing to defend it." "I don't care," Alex snapped. "If we don't take them out now, we're finished." The Dalmer contractor, her eyes scanning the battlefield, spoke quietly. "We have one more trick up our sleeves, but we need to move quickly. Follow me." With no time to waste, Alex and the others followed the Dalmer into the depths of the wasteland, leaving the chaotic battlefield behind them. The creatures continued to battle the Dominion forces, their roars filling the air as they fought to the death, but Alex knew they couldn't last much longer. The Dominion would regroup and retaliate soon enough. They reached a secluded part of the wasteland, where the terrain was rough and the ground seemed to shift beneath their feet. The Dalmer led them to a narrow canyon, where strange, twisting plants grew in clusters. These plants were unlike anything Alex had ever seen, long, sinewy tendrils that seemed to pulse with life. "Here," the Dalmer said, her voice low. "We can use these. They have properties that the Dominion won't expect." Alex looked at the plants skeptically, but there was no time to question the Dalmer's knowledge. He trusted her instincts. They had gotten them this far. The creatures had been their first line of defense, but now it was time for their final, desperate weapon. The Dalmer quickly began to work, using the tendrils of the plants to create something new, something unexpected. Alex didn't ask questions. He worked alongside her, using whatever tools he had left in his pack to help with the process. Together, they fashioned crude yet effective explosive devices, biological bombs, crafted from the very plants that had once seemed like nothing more than part of the wasteland's wild and dangerous ecosystem. The bombs were ready, and Alex could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him. There was no turning back now. The Dominion's forces were advancing. It was now or never. With the bombs secured and their strategy set, Alex and the group made their way back to the battlefield, where the Dominion's forces had regrouped, the creatures continuing their battle in the distance. The final confrontation was imminent, but as Alex approached the battlefield's edge, he noticed something, a figure standing tall against the smoke and fire, watching them with calculating eyes, the Dominion leader, the same figure who had given the order to annihilate them. Alex felt his heart skip a beat. The real battle had just begun. Would these final weapons be enough to break the Dominion's hold, or had they walked right into a trap? The battlefield stretched out before Alex like a war-torn wasteland, smoke and fire swirling in the air, the roar of explosions still echoing from every corner. The creatures had fought valiantly, but they were being overwhelmed by the sheer might of the Dominion forces. The once mighty beasts, whose strength had been their greatest asset, were now falling one by one, their massive bodies littering the earth like broken statues. The Dominion's artillery had proved devastating, and their soldiers, relentless, cold, and efficient, had proven difficult to defeat, even with the creature's brutal force. But Alex couldn't dwell on the losses. He couldn't afford to. There was no time for grief. They had a job to do. The Dominion leader stood at the center of the chaos, watching the battle unfold from his position behind his soldiers. His helmet gleamed in the firelight, a symbol of the Dominion's cold, calculating dominance. Alex felt his muscles tighten as he scanned the battlefield, his mind racing. He could see the creatures, those mighty guardians of the wasteland, still fighting, still giving everything they had to protect the land and those who had helped them. But it wasn't enough. They were fighting a losing battle. The Dominion had the technology, the manpower, and the resources to wipe them all out. "We can't let them win," Alex muttered to himself. The Dalmer contractor, her reptilian eyes narrowed in focus, stood beside him. "We've done all we can. The bombs are ready, but there's still a risk if we don't hit them in the right place." "I know," Alex said, his voice tense. "We hit their command center and we stopped their coordination. That's our best shot. But it's not just about hitting them with the bombs, it's about hitting them where it hurts. Their leadership, the heart of their operation." The Kayak contractor, whose bioluminescent nodes flickered with nervous energy, stepped forward. "Are you certain this will work? They're not just an army, they're a system. We're dealing with an entire faction that's dedicated to domination. A simple strike may not." "It will work," Alex interrupted, his voice firm. "If we can disrupt their leadership, they'll lose control. That's the key. The rest will fall apart." The other contractors looked at each other, uncertainty still in their eyes. They had seen Alex's resilience, his resourcefulness, and his ability to turn the tide of battle when the odds were stacked against him. But now, as the final push loomed, they all knew that the outcome was still uncertain. The Dominion leader remained unmoving, seemingly impervious to the chaos around him. But Alex knew that the leader was the linchpin, their backbone. If he fell, the entire Dominion force would falter. It was now or never. They began to move toward their target, the heart of the Dominion's forces where the leader stood. Alex, the Dalmer, the Kayak, and the Vin, all moving in synchronized silence, their minds focused on the task at hand. They had to strike quickly. If they failed, the Dominion's forces would crush them in an instant. As they advanced, Alex's heart pounded in his chest. He could hear the sounds of battle growing fainter behind him, the screams of the creatures as they fought for their lives, the explosions that marked their final stand. It was impossible to ignore the devastation, but Alex had no choice. He had to focus. They reached the perimeter of the Dominion's command center. The structure was heavily guarded, a towering edifice of reinforced metal and advanced technology. It seemed invincible, but Alex knew better. Everything had a weak point. Everything had a flaw. The group crouched behind a rocky outcrop, hidden from view by the smoke and chaos. Alex's breath came in shallow bursts, his mind calculating their next move. He turned to the Dalmer, whose eyes were filled with quiet determination. "You know what to do?" he asked. The Dalmer nodded. "I'll initiate the distraction. You need to plant the bombs at the core. Once that's done, we can set them off. But we have seconds. We can't afford to hesitate." Alex nodded, his grip tightening around the crude explosives they had fashioned from the plants in the wasteland. "Let's move." The Dalmer stepped forward, her movements swift and fluid, her body blending into the shadows. As she advanced, she triggered a series of small, controlled explosions at the outer perimeter of the Dominion base. The sound was deafening, a flash of light blinding Alex for a moment as the Dominion forces scrambled to react. The distraction had worked, just as planned. "Now," Alex shouted. They moved quickly, sprinting toward the heart of the Dominion base. The Kayak, with their swift, almost mechanical movements, led the way, clearing the path with quick bursts of energy from their weapons. The Vin followed, their crystalline bodies shimmering as they darted past, their sharp eyes scanning the battlefield. The Dalmer remained behind, ensuring that the diversion kept the Dominion's attention divided. Alex reached the core of the base, a massive central structure surrounded by thick walls and guarded by an elite unit of Dominion soldiers. But they hadn't expected a strike from within. Alex ducked behind cover, pulling out the bombs, each one carefully crafted from the materials they had scavenged. With practiced precision, he planted them at the core of the structure. His hand trembled as he set the final charge. This was it. No turning back now. The Dominion leader was still out of reach, but this was the blow that would destabilize their entire operation. A loud explosion rocked the ground, and the walls of the command center shook. Alex ducked low as the shockwave passed, feeling the heat from the blast sear the air. He didn't know if they had succeeded yet, if the bombs had hit their mark, but he knew they had to get out of there fast. "Time to go," Alex shouted. The ground trembled once again, this time more violently. The Dominion forces had retaliated, launching countermeasures to prevent any more strikes. But Alex didn't stop. He kept moving, his legs burning as he sprinted back toward the others. But just as they neared the exit, a Dominion soldier appeared from behind a wall of smoke, blocking their path. He was bigger than the others, his armor more advanced. Alex knew immediately This was the Dominion leader. The leader raised his weapon, a massive rifle capable of leveling entire buildings in seconds. He aimed it directly at Alex, his voice amplified through his helmet's comms. "You thought you could stop us, human? You thought you could defeat the Dominion with your primitive tools?" Alex's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't hesitate. He grabbed the last of his bombs, one final weapon, and hurled it with all his strength at the Dominion leader. The bomb flew through the air, its arc perfect. But just as it was about to reach its target, the Dominion leader raised his hand. A force field flickered to life around him, stopping the bomb midair. Alex's heart sank. This wasn't over. The Dominion leader wasn't just powerful, he was prepared. And now, the final showdown would come down to one last move. Could Alex's ingenuity defeat the Dominion, or had he finally met his match? The bomb stopped midair, suspended by an unseen force. The shimmering barrier around the Dominion leader flickered, and Alex could see the energy field crackling, holding the explosive in place. His heart sank as he watched the weapon he had relied on for this final push simply hover, useless. It was a sickening feeling, like his last hope was slipping through his fingers. The Dominion leader stood tall, towering over Alex, his figure imposing in the darkened chaos. His voice, cold and unyielding, boomed through the comms, amplified by his helmet speakers. "You thought you could win, human? You thought you could change the outcome with your primitive toys?" His words dripped with disdain, as if this whole battle was a mere annoyance to him. "You are nothing. Your weapons are nothing. The Dominion will crush you." Alex, however, didn't flinch. He was beaten, yes, but not broken. The battle had taken everything from him, his strength, his resources, the lives of those who had fought alongside him. But he still had one thing left, his ingenuity, and he wasn't about to give up now. The explosion hovered, suspended by the force field. Alex's mind raced. There had to be a way. He couldn't let this be the end. Without thinking, Alex dove to the side, rolling behind a pile of debris just as the Dominion leader's gaze followed him. The soldier's weapon powered up, but Alex was already moving, using the broken terrain for cover. He needed a distraction, something to break the leader's focus. In that moment, Alex remembered the stone blade he had crafted at the beginning of this trial. It had seemed so insignificant back then, just a crude weapon made from the materials of the wasteland. But in his hands, it had become something far more, a symbol of humanity's refusal to be dismissed. He reached into his pack and pulled it out, the weight of it a reminder of everything he had endured. With a flash of inspiration, Alex gripped the stone blade tightly and hurled it toward the Dominion leader with all the force he could muster. The leader's attention snapped to the stone blade as it sailed through the air. But Alex didn't expect the weapon to hit. It wasn't meant to. The stone blade, its edge gleaming in the chaos, ricocheted off the force field, its trajectory deflected. And just as Alex had hoped, the deflection of the blade caused the force field to ripple, just for a fraction of a second, but that was all he needed. In that split second, Alex saw the opening. He dove for the bomb, which had been held in place by the force field, and with all his remaining strength, he slapped it into the ground, triggering the final detonation sequence. The Dominion leader's expression, frozen behind the visor of his helmet, shifted slightly as he realized what Alex had done. "No!" he bellowed, but it was too late. With a deafening roar, the explosion detonated. The shockwave blasted outward, the energy barrier around the Dominion leader flickering and then collapsing under the sheer force. The blast sent Alex sprawling across the ground, his body slamming into the rocky surface. The world seemed to implode for a moment, everything collapsing into a blur of fire, smoke, and searing heat. But then, as the noise faded, there was only silence. Alex blinked, struggling to rise to his feet. His body was battered, bruised, but he wasn't dead. The explosion had done its job. The barrier around the Dominion leader had shattered, and with it, the leader's imposing figure had fallen. His body, though heavily armored, was no match for the blast. Alex's vision swam as he slowly got up, taking in the smoking ruins around him. The battle had been won, not by superior technology, but by sheer force of will. The Dominion soldiers, confused and disoriented, began to retreat. The command structure had been broken, their leader fallen, and with that, the heart of their operation had been destroyed. The remaining forces scattered, no longer sure of their purpose without the leadership that had so ruthlessly guided them. Alex stood there, breathing heavily, his eyes scanning the battlefield. The other contractors, the Vin, the Kayak, and the Dalmer, emerged from their hiding places, taking in the devastation. They too could see the battle was over, the Dominion's once mighty forces now in disarray. The Kayak contractor, who had been the most skeptical of Alex's plans, stepped forward, his nodes pulsing with a mixture of respect and disbelief. "You did it," he said, his voice unsteady. "You actually did it. We thought we were finished. But you—" Alex raised a hand to stop him. "It wasn't just me," he said. "It was all of us. If we hadn't worked together, none of this would have happened." The Dalmer, still catching her breath, nodded solemnly. "The Dominion underestimated your species. They always have." Alex's gaze shifted to the sky, where the last of the Dominion ships was retreating. For a brief moment, he thought about all the lives lost, the sacrifices made. He had fought for survival, but the cost of that survival had been high. His heart weighed heavy with the memory of the creatures, the allies who had given everything for the cause. He would remember them, always. "We've won," the Vin contractor said quietly, his crystalline form flickering in the light. "But it's only one battle in a much larger war." Alex didn't reply immediately. He looked out across the wasteland, the scars of battle still visible. The Dominion had been defeated today, but the war was far from over. Humanity had proven something today, that against all odds they could stand up and fight. But the galaxy was vast, and there were other forces at work. Forces that would test humanity's resolve again. "We've won," Alex said finally, his voice steady. "But the real work begins now." As the remaining Dominion forces retreated into the distance, Alex took a deep breath. He had been tested in ways he couldn't have imagined, but he had survived. And now, humanity had a place at the table, not just as a species to be dismissed, but as one that could shape the future. He turned toward the others, who were beginning to regroup. The trial was over, but the journey, that was just beginning. And as the sun began to set over the horizon, casting long shadows over the scorched earth, Alex knew that no matter what came next, humanity would never be underestimated again. In the aftermath of the battle, as Alex and the contractors discussed their next steps, a transmission crackled through the comms. It was a message from an unknown source, encrypted and urgent. As Alex keyed in the decryption sequence, the message came through, crystal clear. "Humanity is not finished. This is only the beginning." The message ended abruptly, leaving Alex and the others to wonder, who was sending this message? And what did it mean for humanity's future in the galaxy? As the stars twinkled above them, Alex looked up, a sense of both foreboding and determination settling in his chest. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humanity's place in the galaxy was no longer up for debate. It had just begun,